Arts organisations around Florida are scrambling to make up budget shortfalls. That's after Governor Ron DeSantis signed the state budget and vetoed $32 million in cultural and museum grants. The cuts will have an impact on hundreds of theatres, museums, performance groups and other arts organisations, large and small. The cuts are part of nearly $1 billion that DeSantis trimmed from the state budget, which is now a whopping $116.5 billion. In a letter to Secretary of State Byrd listing the line item vetoes, DeSantis said, quote, "We're making big investments in our future while spending less of our taxpayers' money to maintain our state's strong financial standing and robust economy." I'm Matthew Petty, and today on Florida Matters, we'll talk to leaders in the arts community around the greater Tampa Bay region about the role their organisations play in the economy and how they'll navigate the next year without that state funding. Joining us in the Doctors Neil Frankel and Lorraine Rubis studio at WUSF is David Jenkins, Producing Artistic Director at Jobsite Theater. It's the resident theatre company at the Straz Center for the Performing Arts in Tampa. And we're joined via Zoom by Mary Bensel, Executive Director at Wezel Performing Arts Hall in the city of Sarasota, Brian Hersh, CEO of the Arts and Cultural Alliance of Sarasota, and Jennifer Jones, President and CEO, Florida Cultural Alliance. Thank you all for being here. David, I just want to start with you from the point of view of a theatre director. How much was Jobsite Theater requesting?
We were recommended and we were awarded just under $70,000. Mm-hmm. That was the initial amount that was recommended.
Okay, and so what would that have paid for?
Well, a whole lot. Basically, the loss of funding for 24-25 has eliminated a full-time position. It's going to result in the stagnation of wages for 72 regional artists. It's going to result in the elimination of free access to in-class services we offer to some 3,000 students here in Hillsborough and Pinellas counties that benefited from that program. It'll create a reduction in our free ticket program, which allowed students to attend weekday matinees of Shakespeare and other literary greats by a whole lot of admissions. And of course, that doesn't even get into things like production values, minor operational things, but that's the substantive community impact of this cut.
So, Mary, let me turn to you. How important is state funding for the Wezel Performing Arts Hall?
Well, I think state funding is crucial. It shows that the state recognizes what we bring to the table economically as well as artistically and entertainment-wise. And it's also important to us because it reinforces it with local organizations and with our funding sources in the county. And while I'm one of the larger arts groups here in Sarasota, we will be able to absorb this loss. I think it can be devastating for smaller organizations. And when I say we'll be able to absorb it, it just means that something will have to be cut that we could do for the community instead. So I'll be honest, we heard all about it at one time on an arts call, and it was a devastating moment.
And just for my benefit and for our listeners as well, how much did you lose in this kind of veto?
Well, initially, I believe we asked for $150,000, and we were recommended for $67,000 in that range. Mm-hmm. And, we always like to get full funding because it's based on our budget size. But to lose $67,000, is a dramatic loss for myself. But, I also recognize that for smaller organizations, it's much more impactful.
David, how much of that state funding, like what sort of proportion of your overall budget was that?
If you're really talking about cash dollars, the initial award amount was roughly about 8% of our total operating budget. But what's important to note, too, is that, these grants were never handouts. They were always competitively vetted awards that had to be matched at least dollar for dollar with the organization's own cash. So, that 8% of our budget, while that probably sounds a lot, it's not.
Okay, and so if you're saying you're matching it dollar for dollar, you've got kind of projects and things that you want to spend the money on, but Correct. You're just going to have to dip deeper into your coffers to find that money or find it somewhere else?
There's been a lot of donor fatigue here lately. It's not that I doubt that we're going to see organizations come spring forward to fill these gaps. So honestly, we've got two choices, which is either creating cuts or raising prices for services we offer.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we'll talk more about that in a bit, but Brian, let me go to you. How much in grant funding was the Arts and Cultural Alliance of Sarasota County, or Sarasota, I should say, counting on?
Yeah, sure. So we were receiving over 60% of our original request, which was then reduced with 47% of the request from the legislature was going to be about just over 29,000. And again, I think as Mary's saying, these hurt, we'll all find a way to do things. We'll all find a way to move forward. But I think it's the loss of public support that's really a dark cloud. And just, the signal that it could relay to whether people visiting here, moving here, retaining staff, attracting staff. Those are some of the really negative indicators, along with just the financial impact, because as you're going to hear all day from us, we know that economically the arts pack a significant economic impact throughout the state. It's a draw for everyone throughout the state. We know in Sarasota County, it's a significant draw. Almost 50% of our audiences during season are really from outside of Sarasota. Mm-hmm. We want to continue to draw those folks to Sarasota. And we don't want this to be something that discourages people from doing that.
And Brian, what number are we as far as the number of employers in Sarasota County? We are really high up, as I recall.
Yeah, so that specific number didn't come out in the last survey, but we typically pack in about the top 10 of regional employers in Sarasota County, when you look at a collective. So it's quite a bit of, again, these are jobs that we're talking about. These are people's livelihoods. It's not just entertainment. This is really part of an identity. This is a cultural identity of our community. It's an identity, I think, of this region. It's an identity of the state to an extent. This has always been, Florida has really been a place where people, and really, listen, our population continues to grow. Mm-hmm. There's something about a quality of life that people mm-hmm. want in Florida. And arts and culture has been a significant draw to that quality of life all along.
And Sarasota has this reputation, right? I mean, it goes back to, Ringling and others, but there's this real kind of image of Sarasota as being a hub for arts and entertainment and culture, right?
Right. So we're known as Florida's Cultural Coast, right? So this has been a long-standing beacon, a legacy of arts and culture from folks like John Ringling and the circus. That legacy is quite large here. And so many of our organizations are really been built on that legacy.
Can I just clarify something? Mary, you were talking about arts organizations being some of the biggest employers in the region. Are you talking about the arts in general or specific organizations?
No, the arts in general. I mean, we have been as high as number 3 or number 4 in different years. I mean, we are quite huge when you look at the number of arts groups. And as I was saying, I come from Philadelphia area where, a big city and so forth. And yet we have more arts groups here than we did in Philadelphia. And, we have an opera house in town. We have a literal circus tent here in town. We're not just have a performing arts hall. We have 2, we have 2 regional theaters, not 1. And so there are so many organizations here, and it's not just actors, it's also stagehands, and you go on, and then you go on the side of that. Our restaurants are filled because we keep at night people coming downtown. Mm-hmm. So it's really huge.
Jennifer, I want to bring you into this conversation. I'm wondering, what you had been hearing during the legislative session and the lead up to the budget being signed about what might or might not be cut from the budget. I mean, was this $32 million veto hinted at? Was it a total surprise?
Well, it was a surprise. Ultimately, it's kind of like a black swan. We, it exists. It can happen. But we just thought that with the reduction of the recommendation, that the legislature had put forward, we understood that the state has a budget surplus. It has a great deal of money in reserves because the state is good at holding on to funds. We heard during Arts Day, people would come out of their appointments and they didn't necessarily feel terribly encouraged by what their delegates were telling them about how appropriations were going in the subcommittees and committees, that we weren't going to get full funding. So the final recommendation was disappointing to begin with, but we thought maybe, okay, that's going to be it. We knew the governor had the veto pen, and the governor did not recommend arts funding in his initial budget that he gives before session begins, his Florida Freedom future budget, it said $0 for the arts. But honestly, we concentrated on advocating to the legislature because that's where the actual budget gets built. There's so much effort that goes into that during session with all the subcommittees leading up to appropriations. And that's where we focused our efforts because that's where historically the work happens. And historically, there'd never been a complete veto of all the arts grants funding. Since 1977, no governor has ever done that before. Although the power exists and the possibility exists, we did not have a read on the probability that it would actually happen.
Jennifer, what have you been hearing from other arts organizations around the state? What are they telling you?
Oh my goodness. Well, it has run the gamut from this was a failure to there's no way, we can be in control of this. So we have to do better. I know we have to do better. And we just recently, 2 hours ago or a little better, got off a statewide advocacy call, pretty much drinking from the fire hydrant ideas. What are people doing to make up the loss right now? And every community is different. So say large communities have a benefit of maybe community foundations and home bases of large businesses and big philanthropic businesses that can make contributions and an audience base. And then we have in the same list that was vetoed, we have very small rural communities that might have had one or two. And talking about percentages of budgets in a very large operation that is essentially in a city that is an international destination for arts and culture because it drives the tourism industry as well. But these smaller communities, some of these organizations may apply for up to 20% of their budget if they're in specific areas. So the hits, it could have been less money, but a greater percentage. But what we're hearing is we're going to have to fire people. We're going to have to cancel shows. We did a survey and, collected the responses and have gotten some feedback from that. Let's see, 69% of them are going to have to make adjustments in my last survey assessment. 43% said the way they're going to do that is to cancel events for the public. 33% said the way they're going to do it is cancel events for children. Reduce staff, about 28% of the respondents said they're going to have to do that. And the facilities grants, there were 15 on that list that's in addition to the general program support. 20 will cancel repairs, 9% will cancel expansions.
Right.
And 5% of the respondents said they would have to discontinue operations. That could be some projects that they're speaking of, not their entire operations, but projects.
So there's quite a laundry list there to go through. Well, you are listening to Florida Matters. We're talking about state funding cuts for the arts and the impact on arts organizations around the Tampa Bay region, speaking with Jennifer Jones of the Florida Cultural Alliance, Brian Hersh with the Arts and Cultural Alliance of Sarasota, Mary Bensel, Executive Director at Van Wezel Performing Arts Hall in Sarasota, and David Jenkins with Jobsite Theater in Tampa. We'll talk more about how arts organizations are working to fill the gap when we come back. Welcome back to Florida Matters. I'm Matthew Petty. We're talking about the $32 million cut to state grants for arts and cultural organizations and how that's affecting the arts in the Tampa Bay region. Speaking with David Jenkins, Producing Artistic Director at Jobsite Theater in Tampa, Mary Bensel, Executive Director at Van Wezel Performing Arts Hall in the city of Sarasota, Brian Hersh, CEO of the Arts and Cultural Alliance of Sarasota, and Jennifer Jones, President and CEO of the Florida Cultural Alliance. Mary, let me just turn to you for a moment. When you look at your budget for 2024, 2025, are you having to make some of those cuts that Jennifer was mentioning a moment ago? Are you going to have to cut some programs? Are there other ways that you're looking to now to make up a budget shortfall?
Yes, I have spoken to a number of the community foundation folks, and it's not so simple as just saying, can the community foundations make it up? Because a lot of these are donor advised funds that people direct where they want the money to go. And so that's a troubling thing. We may have to do a fundraising effort to say we need your support because there are other government funds that we count on as well. And I just don't want this to be an indicator that continues this thought, because support in Florida, as everyone has said, and I think Jennifer was quite eloquent about it is that the state of Florida has more performing arts halls and more opportunities than almost any state I can think of.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because we have a population here that literally moves to Sarasota and Florida because of the arts presence. If you looked at any of the offerings of the high-end condos and homes that are going up, you will see the arts referenced over and over. Be close to the beach, but also be close to the arts institutions. And so
come for the sunshine, but stay for the opera.
You bet. And I've been on a group chat with all the theaters and people were literally deciding that they were going to have to cut their box office hours. So because they couldn't afford to pay all the box office employees. And so you look at that and you cut box office hours, and then you're looking at, cutting areas of where you actually can sell tickets and makeup funding. So you have to be very careful when you look at those, but we contract for shows way in advance. I mean, I'm working on the 26-27 season right now. So it's not like I can turn around and just make a decision that I won't do, let's say, Beetlejuice or Moulin Rouge or whatever show, because they're all touring. And so I have to keep our word. And so we'll have to find it somewhere, or we'll have to make some internal cuts. But it's more the whole idea to me is just devastating that he would cut every single dollar. That to me is hurtful.
David, I think that somebody had mentioned before the break the idea of donor fatigue. So when you think about, where are you going to look to for other funds, like what goes through your mind?
A whole lot. We're a relatively small theater company for professional theater in the state of Florida. I kind of feel like most of our people are already giving it their capacity. And so to just come out and say we need more money doesn't mean that there's fruit to shake off that tree, right? So, in our case, we know the donor fatigue is pretty real. We know people's capacity is really sort of strained. But I think it was Jennifer that mentioned, sort of the maybe the canary in the coal mine that's really scary is that, when the state signals something like this, it does trickle down to the regular people that have donor advised funding. Our own Arts Council here, our own Board of County Commissioners here in Hillsborough County have now voted twice on defunding the Arts Council. They're literally one vote away from being able to do that, and there are elections in the fall, and this is disturbing.
Okay, so Jennifer, back to you for a moment. By the state's own estimate, the arts generate about $2.9 billion in economic activity. Is that the pitch you bring to lawmakers in your lobbying efforts during the legislative session? You kind of say, look at the numbers, here's what it's telling you, this is why it's a good deal to sort of fund some of this at the front end?
Well, so that economic activity definitely is an attribute of the arts industry. That to say that nonprofit arts and culture is an industry in the state of Florida. It's we are nonprofits, but it is not simply a charity. It is an economic driver. So we want to show the strength. And there are more nonprofit arts and culture organizations than are even on the list. It's a huge market, and it's actually $5.1 billion totally, the entire industry by these organizations. And these are nonprofits, not attractions and for-profits. And it's about 3.15% of the GDP. So if you're investing in something that generates returns to the taxing authorities' coffers, this is a good one to invest in. Also, from a political perspective, it seems like good business first to invest in something that returns to the coffers, but it also brings people across aisles and out of their homes, that isolation and that separation that we've already suffered because of, looking back. Nobody wants to look back at COVID, but the arts nonprofits lost jobs at a rate of 5 times other nonprofits nationwide. So we're recovering, and we're a vibrant industry, but it is a partnership, and it is for it's a public good service that can happen to keep communities engaged and not separated when there's so much that separates us. If we stay at home and isolated, we're going to narrow our echo chamber to the point where we all know what we're not for, but we don't often get together with what we are for. So it has intrinsic and extrinsic value, and we can't abandon one for the other argument, but we tend to make the financial argument a lot when we're talking about appropriations. But it's a strong industry, and it's a good investment because it reaps returns for the investor in a year's time.
Right. Brian, thinking about partnerships, as Jennifer mentioned, what kind of partnerships do you think could help some of these arts organizations get through the next 12 months and probably beyond as well?
I think it's going to take a lot of creative partnerships. I think some of the things that have been really proven in difficult times, our arts organizations really pull together. So I think finding some needs where we can help each other out will be significant. Are there opportunities, are there box office sharing opportunities? Are there ways that we can maximize efficiencies? We can do those things. I think partnering, we always say arts builds community. So what community partners do we have? Who outside of the arts can really help continue to advocate and see the value that arts organizations are making as well? In that canary, we know that restaurants who plan their schedules around what performance times are happening. When we talk about, public income as well, what parking garages and parking lots are making their income based on when people have to go to certain performances. So we really hope that there's much more partnership to really help the state really know about the ramifications of these decisions. But we've got to find some creative ways too, because I think economically I'd be surprised if they didn't see some of this. So perhaps there's something different, and so what is that other message that we can help tell the state that will help make a case for that next round of funding, because we know that arts really does add a great deal to the state of Florida and to each of our communities. So what is it going to take to really bring folks around to seeing some of that value that's here?
Mary, what's your message to Sarasota residents who value the arts and who may be worried about these cuts?
Well, my message was to be supportive in any way you can. Volunteer. That helps us with saving money. All of our ushering staff are volunteers. I would also say donate. What's hard for us right now is we're in the middle of a capital campaign to build a new performing arts hall. And so when you're suddenly having to shore up a budget, it takes away from another project that you're trying to do. And then I would say, come to the theater, buy tickets, whether it's to the opera or the ballet. We also have a great impact on tourism. Our Sarasota Ballet has been over in London. Brian just came back from watching them on the Royal Opera stage. And they were brilliant over there. The reviews were spectacular. And that brings all sorts of tourists from, what for Sarasota is a really hot market. Mm-hmm. And so we bring a lot to this state. And I sort of feel that we need the state to give back to us in return by either volunteering, coming to our shows, or donating to help us out.
David, what kind of conversations are you having already, or are you planning to have with other arts groups in Tampa? Like, how do you see arts organizations working together to survive?
I think there is a lot of room for creative partnership, and I think that we've even investigated some of it. I mean, there's a lot of logistical details that you have to figure out, but we've addressed things like shared costume and storage space, maybe shared shop space, so we can try to eliminate some expenses that then maybe help us all. But those that's difficult because everybody's very busy and everybody's very understaffed.
Yeah.
So that level of coordination then becomes challenging because then you need somebody to manage it, and none of the organizations have an extra person to spare to do that. So we are having conversations. I think that many of us here, at least in Hillsborough County, are very collegial, and we work relatively close together anyway. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure that there's a whole lot left to do, but what I'd like to reinforces this idea of the best way that people can help any arts organization is to be involved in that arts organization. Don't just like the post on Facebook, buy a ticket, show up. That is absolutely, when people ask me how can people help, it's go to a show.
Right.
That's that simple.
Brian, I wanted to just come back to you for a moment because David talked about kind of this chilling effect of, if the state of Florida is sort of leading from the top and saying we are going to, cut this funding, that could trickle down to, the county and city level as well. Is that something that you worry about?
I think that those are really difficult conversations. And I think it's really important that we stay focused on what we can control. There's a lot ahead. So it just means, how do we continue to connect with our local county officials, with our city officials, make sure that they understand where the value is. I think that's the best thing, is to stay ahead where we can and stay positive to an extent, and really helping them see the case of why investing in the arts is a worthy and important investment.
And Jennifer, just to wrap up here, are you already thinking about the next legislative session and the future of these grants?
Absolutely. So we have requests in, and part of my to-do list after this interview is to have a conversation. We've requested a meeting with the executive office, the governor's office staff, to find out from them what do we need to know from your office to help us avoid this next year, and from the Secretary of State's office, because he's a cabinet member, that he could offer some insight too, because he is directly involved in those conversations, so that we can allow the field to know what's going on, be better prepared, and read the tea leaves a little better. But also, if there's a conversation, if something needs to happen that he would like to see different in the process, then we'd like to know what that is, because the process has actually begun. The grants are submitted, and there are more grants this year that were submitted on January 3rd was the deadline. Mm-hmm. So the process has begun. So we want to make sure that whatever needs to happen happens before we get to organizational session, which is before legislative session. So there's some behind the scenes work. We have some grass tops advocates we're going to reach out to, and we hope the media sees this as a series rather than a single story. And the media's coverage, which we are extremely grateful for, because we've gotten a lot of it, more than I can recall in the past, to help spread the good news and the good progress that we're making as we go along.
Well, we've been speaking with Jennifer Jones, President and CEO of Florida Cultural Alliance. Also joining us, David Jenkins, Producing Artistic Director at Jobsite Theater in Tampa, Mary Bensel, Executive Director at Wezel Performing Arts Hall in the city of Sarasota, and Brian Hersh, CEO of the Arts and Cultural Alliance of Sarasota. Thank you all very much for joining us. That's our show for this week. Our executive producer is Grayson Doctor. Engineering support from Gio Gorvin. Subscribe to Florida Matters wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Matthew Petty. Thanks for listening.